Welcome back to the Metric Stack podcast and to season 3, where we're speaking with thought leaders about the emerging metrics layer. Straight from Stockholm, Sweden, I'm joined today by Johan Baltzar, co-founder and CEO at Steep, a newer, faster way for teams to understand business metrics. Johan and his co-founder Nino Hoagland bring with them years of experience from companies such as PayPal and Spotify. As always, I'm your host, Allan Wille, co-founder and CEO at Klipfolio. Johan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Allan. It's great to be here.
Awesome. That sounds great. So listen, Johan, why don't we start with a little bit of context? So maybe sort of an opening question. Who are you? Tell us a little bit about Steep, and then we'll sort of get into some of the meat of today's episode.
Sounds good. All right. So I guess about myself. So I'm an analytics leader. I think I started at Spotify 10 years ago. It was back when, Spotify has just launched in the US, I think, and built up an analytics team there, worked closely with product development. And I think I like to say I basically doing the same thing over and over, right? So I was at Spotify, then I went to a place called Settle, which eventually got acquired by PayPal for $2 billion. And after that, I went to another European unicorn called...
You sort of just skipped over. It was acquired for $2 billion?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's so just a small change.
Yeah, a small change. No, so I've been lucky enough to hit some of those nice European unicorns, which has been amazing.
Very cool.
I had been fortunate enough to work with a lot of great people, I think, through the years, and that's where I met Nino, my current co-founder, actually. So I was just there for a stint at Settle, and he was there for the entire journey, founding team too, and actually stayed on a couple of years after they got acquired by PayPal. Which was an interesting journey, I think.
Yeah, I'm sure, right? So
yeah, of course. It's so Stockholm is a nice place to work in the tech scene. It's a lot of cool things happening. After Settled, I moved on to a place called KRY. It's another European unicorn focused on telemedicine. Similar to Oscar Health or something like that, I think.
And likewise, were you doing sort of part of the analytics team or the data team? Was that part of that gig?
Yeah, exactly. So, it was basically me moving there to kind of build up the whole data and analytics practice from scratch. So I built up a team of 30 people doing everything from data engineering to kind of internal machine learning, a lot of kind of forecasting and staffing optimization. But then we did a lot of business analysis, like a lot of BI. And I hired some, 25 analysts to service everyone across the company. So yeah, everything from marketing to operations.
Yeah, and for the audience that of course can't see Johan, he had a sort of a strange smile when he said he hired a lot of business analysts. I can just imagine, like, are you hiring all these business analysts because there's just an overwhelming requirement for everybody to get reports after reports after reports, and there's no good self-service?
Well, I think you're onto something, Allan. So I think,
okay.
I mean, so I like to say, I've been doing the same thing over and over again, kind of coming in and be like, hey, we know how to do this. Every tech company needs to be data-driven, and now everyone understands that, and there's a lot of managers out there who have the experience of using data, so they kind of come in and say like, hey, I need data to do my job, otherwise I'm flying blind, I don't know what they're doing. So we need, of course, like a strong foundation. We need to invest in a data stack and then kind of analytics practice. So that's been what I've kind of bring to the table, the experience of like, how do you do that? How do you hire and train a bunch of people?
It's so strange because I remember going to Gartner conferences, the big BI summit years ago, and reading all sorts of analyst reports. And every year, consistently, BI and data seemed to be very, very high on the investment level. Like every company was investing in data and business intelligence. And yet the thing that we haven't cracked yet is that only 20% of users are actually adopting BI. And even that, I think, is probably an exaggeration. So something's not quite working with traditional BI.
No, for sure, 100%. I mean, I've been at it a couple of times, right? And I think that was, that was the thing for me. I became kind of frustrated with. So on the one hand, you have the whole kind of data engineering practice, like the data stack now compared to 10 years ago. It's amazing. Like, it's just completely changed. It's like cloud services, it's cheap, it's efficient, it's scalable. We used to talk about big data, and we don't need to talk about it anymore because it's a solved problem, right? So it's less talking and just more doing, right? Which is amazing. At Spotify, I remember we ran our own Hadoop cluster, 1,000 nodes, and it was a big technical challenge. And now you can just pay, Google Cloud, and they will solve the problem for you. So that's amazing, right? So I've seen this change, but on the other hand, then you have like, okay, now we have a bunch of data, and we want an entire company of 100 to 500 people all using data, every day. That's the dream, and that's what everyone wants. But how do you do that? Like, how do you get it out from your data warehouse and make it useful for everyone?
So let's pause there, right? Because at some point, you and Nino were like, enough is enough. Like, we've got to do something about this. So how did Steep? What was the kernel of inspiration that got you guys moving?
No, exactly. And I was kind of waiting for like, hey, better tool needs to be coming, and I tried them all, basically. I tried all the traditional BI practices, and I ran them in professional settings. I think, to me, like, what I realized was the whole paradigm is broken, I think. And we're still stuck in this old paradigm, the old way of doing BI, where you have a ton of specialists who are, smart people, great people, and they are basically building dashboards and report for everyone else. And all the end users out there, like, when they need to get their hands on some data, they have to kind of go looking through that big mess of old dashboards and reports and try to find the one that kind of suits their needs, right? And it's not flexible, it's not user-friendly, and it's usually quite a mess.
Yeah, and that mess is getting bigger. I mean, the more data, the more the tooling actually gets easier, the more the mess is getting bigger.
100%. So you see people, they start out with a BI tool, and it's easy in the beginning, and you throw up some dashboards and reports. And then over time, once people get, they want more data, the endless requests starts coming in, right? So I hear this all the time now that we go around and talk to data teams, and I've been there myself. You just have like the endless flood of requests kind of coming in over Slack of just like, oh, I need this, I can't find this, or can I trust this number, or why is this number a little bit different from that number? Once you start to have a lot of dashboards, they consistency starts to slip, and it's all kind of, if you take a step back, it's kind of due to the way we're doing this, right? So it's very kind of, the old way is very kind of low level and manual. So if you're looking at other kind of engineering practices, we talk about don't repeat yourself, put kind of definitions centrally, trying to be more and more efficient with everything that you're doing. And with BI, unfortunately, I think we're stuck in the past. I think we're 10 or 20 years behind other fields, and we need to catch up, basically.
Okay, so that's what you're doing. This is Steep. This is Steep in a nutshell. This is the problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, 100%. So I got super excited about this idea of working with the semantic layer, and that was like 2 or 3 years ago. So we were exploring this crazy idea, and now it's becoming more of a thing, more of a movement, which is awesome. And to me, I mean, we need to move to a new way of working. We need it to be more efficient, more systematic, and most importantly, we need it to be more flexible and way, way more user-friendly for all the roles across a company, because that's where the value is in data. Like, it doesn't matter if you've invested and you have a bunch of data in a data warehouse. Like, you can talk about being data-driven, but if this is not kind of ever-present for all roles and in all kind of processes throughout your company, then like you've lost the value, basically, right?
So let's talk about that for a little bit. And I know that before, when we were exchanging emails, we talked a little bit about this changing relationship between the end users, or the consumers, the decision makers, and the data teams. And You've already described the frustration. The data team is getting endless requests, right? They really want to manage other things and make sure that there's good governance and quality. The decision makers, they don't trust the data, et cetera, et cetera. This is the traditional way of doing things that has existed now for 20 or 30 years. So how do you see this semantic layer or metrics layer changing the relationship? Because I think that's key. That is really key, sort of making sure that divide becomes aligned.
100%. Yeah. And I think, the analysts out there aren't happy about being bottlenecks. I think, most of them want to be more efficient and want to maybe do cooler stuff with their time, either being systematic or doing more deeper work. And I think the cool thing, what we've learned, now we've spent more than 2 years just doing the semantic layer, been using it ourselves, been using it together with our early customers. And what we're seeing is there's this shift in roles, right? So you as a data specialist, talking broadly about like the different data roles out there, your job, when you kind of go fully all in on the semantic layer, this new way of working, your job becomes more of building up the data stack, building up kind of the structure of your data, the architecture, and spending way more time on defining metrics, kind of thinking through the metrics framework for your company. So, what are, the key metrics? What are the second tier metrics? What are the drivers to those metrics, right? And in like not having too many, but still have enough that every kind of function of your company has enough metrics to understand what's important to them and have clarity on what they own. If we're improving, what are the metrics that we should be improving, right? So what do we set targets on? So you kind of see like instead of kind of serving folks, you kind of set the system in place for everyone else to do more themselves.
Right. So the data teams are able to build more of a platform as opposed to be a services organization.
Exactly. And then on the end user side, the really cool thing is that when you don't, you're not kind of having to go dig through, a pile of dashboards, and you don't have to learn SQL. You can instead go to a nice catalog, a library of predefined metrics, and then you can start digging through there. And you have all the flexibility you need. It's this kind of common language across the company. So you can kind of easily find what you need, and you can have the full flexibility to solve your own problems. And then that becomes a platform for actually collaborating across different roles across your company.
So, I mean, this is a vision that we share with you as well. I mean, we've been thinking about this divide as well, and why are the end users frustrated and not trusting the data that they see? Why are the data teams frustrated and not able to sort of work on governance and data quality? So 100%, this semantic layer, we really hope will simplify that relationship. The end users will have this catalog of things that they can use and manage and even potentially build derivative calculated, second generation metrics from, because it's trusted on the fundamentals. Anyway, so I do have a question, because the one thing that we notice is when we're talking with decision makers and business end users, they're not using and thinking about metrics yet. When we talk to them, they're still thinking about, I want a dashboard or I want a report. They're not thinking as, the atomic element, the metric being the atomic element. So how do all of us, how do we overcome that idea that we need to educate end users on thinking specifically about metrics as first-class citizens?
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on there. And you can kind of see, I think it's because we've had this paradigm for so long. So it's, your executives out there, they're just like, no, I want a dashboard. That's what I'm asking for. And some of the analysts, that's what they've been trained to do. I've been building reports for everyone for 10 years. So I think we're all a little bit stuck in our ways. I'm not sure I have a great solution for you yet. I think when people experience it for themselves, the ability to be like, oh, I have the full catalog. I can just go in, I can just click on everything, and then I can explore freely myself. Like, I don't need to request anything through Slack. Like, I don't need to dig up an old report. I can just do stuff myself, and we can actually collaborate on this. I think seeing is believing here.
Yeah, and I think perhaps some of it is understanding that even if you've requested a dashboard, this is now a new generation of dashboard. This dashboard is made up of metrics that are trusted. They all have a common global definition, and this metric here on this dashboard is the same as the report that I asked for over here, right? So when we come into a meeting, and I can see that if I drill into this metric, it has a certain lineage, and I can trust it. So I think the idea of asking for dashboards and reports, that's going to be a long-term ask for the business users. But I think if we can say, well, yes, we're dashboards, but we're better. We have better trust, better lineage, better single source of truth. That's what we're trying to get through here. So I mean, that's what we're trying to do as well, right? But you're absolutely right. The idea of this semantic layer that increases this relationship between the data team and the business end user, that's ultimately what we're trying to do.
Yes, I think so. And I think like the end result of this, to me, what I'm seeing is we will need fewer analysts doing the basic things over and over again, which that's what we're kind of stuck with today. You need to service, all those requests, but it's a lot of the basic things over and over again. Writing queries and building visualizations.
Based on your experience working for large organizations and being part of the data team, and looking forward at what this semantic and metrics layer is doing, do you think these tools are going to replace the traditional tools, or do you think we're going to live alongside Sisense and Tableau and Power BI? What do you think the future environment is going to be for most of these business teams?
I think when we started out 2 years ago, I was kind of like on the fence. I was like, maybe this is like a nice addition, flexible way for managers to solve some of their problems. But I think with 2 years experience now of like trying this out and like really kind of pushing it to the limit of like how flexible and how powerful can this type of solution be, it's very clear to me. I think this will replace the old way of working. This is the new way of doing BI, I think, full stop.
And is it the new way because it truly is the single source of truth?
I think to me, the single source of truth and the system is, a big source of the value. That's the foundation. But I think the big, powerful thing is that we're unlocking all the business users, all the end users out there, that they can now solve their own questions, and they will have more questions, and they will want to do more things. And once they kind of get the freedom to be like, hey, this is just like Notion, or this is just like Figma if you're a designer, or once you get to that level of quality, when it becomes for the kind of the end user tooling, then I think there's no going back. This will be, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna push back. I'm gonna push back on that. Do you think that's true for a non-technical business end user as well as a data analyst? So a data analyst, they want to use R, they want to use SPSS, they want to use something that they're very familiar with, but they still need trusted data. Do you think they're going to use this new generation of tools? Do you think there's going to be a new generation of R that, reads in, trusted, metric level data? Or do you think there is going to be different audiences that do in fact use different tools? Like I'm talking consumption tools, So, if the architecture is data warehouse, semantic layer, consumption tool, what does that consumption future look like?
Yeah, and let's unpack this a little bit here, because one question I think is between the business analysis versus kind of like deeper, more kind of data science analysis, if you will. So I think there will always be kind of a line where it's like, when do you use a BI type of tool? What kind of analysis is that good for? And that's usually good for, 95% of all the questions in your company, all the reporting, all the kind of operational stuff, right? And then you get to deeper harder questions, where you're looking at, correlation, you're forecasting the future or whatever. And then you will probably want to have like a proper data scientist using R or, a Python notebook or Hex or something like that, right? So I think that will still be true, I think, in the future. It's hard to build a tool that does both of those jobs really well. And then the other question is like, yes, I think you're right when it comes to like how does the semantic layer fit in if you do have different tools for different roles? And I think we will move to a place where you will want to have your definitions in one place, which is still a challenge, I think, and obviously since we're seeing a lot of, there's a lot of things bubbling, I think, in the semantic layer ecosystem, right? So you have pure kind of infrastructure layers, people who come with the approach like your Cube.js or your DBT semantic layer, right? Who kind of view this as an infrastructure problem, like a layer in the data stack. And then you have folks like, like Steep or you guys who are kind of more thinking about the end user experience and the tooling side of things. But I think we need to converge on a place where you could actually have your definitions in one place and hook up different tools to those same definitions. I think that's where we need to end up. But I think we still have some work to do when it comes to kind of aligning on standards and building up better APIs to make that happen.
Yeah, and I think that word standards is probably a massive piece of the puzzle moving forward. So where do those definitions live? Is it a standard? Is it a pseudo standard that, Looker may have a certain standard, DBT may have a certain standard? Are they compatible? So I completely agree, because at some point, yes, I think Steep and Klipfolio, we're interested. We're actually very good at that end user layer. But how do we make sure that whatever the end users are consuming is also consumable by the data teams and the analysts and those that potentially want to have different tools? And let's go even a little further. What about machines in the future? If we have good, trusted, defined data, is the future as much about making sure that the end users have a tool that they can trust as well as machines? How important do you think machine consumption is going to be in the future?
I think it's going to be huge. I think we're kind of naturally more thinking about people. That's kind of where our passion lies, in building, using in the machine capabilities, all the models to build better tools for people and making people super efficient. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there's some awesome possibilities of kind of connecting, all sorts of services to those kind of trusted definitions and being able to kind of, automatically trigger things or have models be running and feeding off the same source of truth. And I think that's an interesting future as well. But I would say, I mean, the passion here is definitely on kind of supercharging people if we can.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that BI has been interested in for the past 30 years and has not been able to crack yet. So yeah, if we can supercharge people, I like the sound of that. Ultimately, there's still a lot of people that have to make good decisions every day, and right now they're struggling, right? So yeah, I think that's important.
I think the way we see the future is that, using data is becoming like this new standard. It's like, it's expected. Like if you're in a modern tech company, any kind of digital company, this is part of your normal, or should be part of your normal everyday work, and maybe not super advanced stuff, but just basic stuff. Just like, what is the impact of what I'm doing, kind of measuring and see what our users are doing or how our business is behaving. So I think with that in mind, with more kind of companies becoming digital, with more managers getting experience and using data, it's just going to be an explosion. And I think the old paradigm just, it's not working today, and we work worse and worse. So we kind of have to move to something more efficient and better.
How ready do you think most, let's take sort of let's ignore the huge companies because I think they're building their own tools. And let's ignore the super small companies because there's not enough data maturity. But sort of the mid-sized company, like a 250 person company, 400 person company. Do you find that their stack is ready? Do you think technically they are ready to start putting a semantic layer in place and start thinking about this? Do they have the rigor, or is even their data layer a complete mess? How homogeneous is this?
I think yeah, you there's a lot of different cases out there. When we're out talking,
yeah, there really
are
is.
Some who's just like would be happy to just get some data in a database and have it be updated.
The number of times that I talk to a big company, a mature company that's doing well, and they're still using Excel in some way, it blows my mind, right? So what are you seeing, or what would be the best case scenario?
So I think for me, what we're seeing is that like there's this conception, I think, when you talk to some data folks, when you start talking about the semantic layer, that, I need to go back and kind of restructure my entire data warehouse before I can even start thinking about a semantic layer. I need to have this perfect structure, right? But I don't think that's necessarily true, right? So I think the cool thing is that you can kind of start where you're at. Like you can just like sync over your backend data, kind of sync it over to BigQuery or Snowflake, start defining your metrics from there. It doesn't have to be this super fancy, super engineered, perfect structure, because you will probably never get there, I think is the truth, right? So probably start from where you are with kind of good enough data and good enough data structure. And the nice thing is that with the semantic layer approach, you automatically get like you kind of end up with a pretty nice structure, right? So the metrics, even if their technical definition might be a little bit wonky because you have your data is weirdly structured, but at least it's in one place, and it's cataloged, it's described, it's the same everywhere. So you kind of end up in a better place from where you started, right? So I think that would be my recommendation for most data teams out there is like, don't wait for the perfect data architecture, but kind of start providing, definitions and providing value from where you are.
Yeah, and I think that goes for almost any BI project. Don't try to boil the ocean. Start with something actionable. Start here, evaluate it, refine it, test it. So, and I agree with you. I think most companies have a messier data infrastructure than they'd like to admit. Now, on the other hand, there's also a number of very qualified data teams that consider the data warehouse that single source of truth. And in many cases, they've invested quite a bit of energy making sure that, the data catalog, the definitions, all of that lineage and quality and governance is really invested in the data warehouse. Do you think there's going to be, is this a point of resistance in moving to a semantic layer? Like, are they saying to themselves, wait a moment, the data warehouse is the single source of truth. I don't want to have something else as well. Or do you think this is a stepping stone that will actually make things a lot easier?
Look, I think data, like, getting the value out of data to an entire company is like this value chain, like this process going from raw data in different systems somewhere, collecting it, structuring it, making sure you have operations in place to keep it fresh, and then several steps in kind of getting it out there and providing value to humans. And I think the semantic layer has been this kind of missing piece in that process. So it doesn't replace, I think, the data warehouse practice of structuring your data. It's rather this kind of add-on in that process, this kind of gap that I've struggled with. So I've been that person, right? I've been the data architecture, data warehouse person who is telling my team to, let's make sure that we have at least like a decent data architecture in place, talking star schema and Kimball and facts and dims and making sure, all that good stuff. And then be like, cool, now we made all this effort and like we have decent enough, tables, and, we could ship those tables to our end users and they could use those tables themselves And then you find that you're kind of stuck in your bubble. Like, hey, wait, not everyone is into SQL, or SQL, and not everyone is like actually good at producing data visualizations. And it turns out that like we spend our time all day long looking at our data model and polishing it, but everyone else is just like they don't have time to understand the data model at all. So I think that's where the gap is, and kind of getting it out to normal people doing being busy doing their normal jobs. It's just like they don't have to, even if they can learn SQL, which they really shouldn't have to. They don't have time to kind of dig into your data model and figure out, oh, I should be, going through this table and picking that column and joining that up with that table. It's so easy to go wrong. It's so hard to kind of wrap your head around what that is and keeping that up to date.
It all comes back to what was the phrase that you used? Supercharging the people, right? Like it all comes back down to that. And you're right. I think there's been a tremendous amount of advances in cloud data, in processing horsepower, in architecture, all on the data side, but very, very little advancement on actually making this stuff consumable and trustworthy from the end user side. Listen, second last question, and then we're going to wrap it up. As far as data literacy goes, and if you guys are passionate about making sure that the end users have got finally stuff that they understand and can make better decisions with, is the semantic layer going to help with data literacy and understanding the data?
Yeah, I think so. I think like once you actually, get this into the hands of people and they can explore themselves and they can do more stuff themselves, I think that will help a lot. I think people are really super smart and capable, but they haven't, they have a job to do. They're kind of busy professionals, right? So I think data literacy previously it's been too hard. Like it's like I don't have time to learn SQL and or kind of learn this kind of hard profession. I just need to get some results out. And now if we do have a way of working and tools to help people actually get what they need, I think data literacy will kind of come along, and maybe it will be more kind of less data literacy and more kind of metric literacy and analysis literacy, to be honest, right? Because, we need to kind of level up our abstractions here and not have people kind of go all the way back into data, but rather kind of work on this new level, which I think we can do now.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, and I think if the semantic layer can help people not only understand the definitions of the measures and the dimensions, but also understand that this is how the data is aggregated and, it's consistent. Like that's the other beauty about this metrics layer. Every single metric should behave exactly the same, right? So it's not learning every time a new construct. So every time it's simple, it's the same, it's consistent. They're building blocks, right? So,
no, 100%. And I see this again and again. I think all the companies I've been at is this constant drain on, on the usefulness of data. It's just like, can I trust these numbers? Like, why are they a little bit different? And these are the old version of that. And like, why are they different? And what has changed? And I think it's an underappreciated thing, like. Because people always kind of assume that it should be consistent. Of course, like I'm looking at numbers in a report, like it should be good, and it turns out, most of the case it's not good. Like it's not 100% consistent. So I think like just kind of having that in place as a foundation for collaboration, and spending less time kind of worrying about if I can use these numbers, and more spending all that time on just using the numbers and just like collaborating on them.
Yeah, and Johan, I mean, when we go out and we talk to people about power metrics and our metric centric approach, and we say, hey, do you want to have a semantic layer or a metrics layer? And they say, I don't know what that is. But when we say, how often have you walked into a meeting and everybody has different numbers, that really does seem to be a very, very common case. So 100%, let's solve that problem moving forward. So listen, closing thoughts. For a team that is currently using sort of a traditional approach, they have a traditional stack, they may be using traditional tooling, they have end users that have behaviors, asking the analysts for reports. Like, where would you start? What is the first thing that you would say you should start thinking about? Obviously, the answer is to contact either Klipfolio or Steep, right? But
for sure, I mean that's where you start, right? But I think besides that, I think it's and it's something I often advise people, companies that want to get better at actually using their data. It's like, well, start thinking about metrics and start kind of defining your first kind of metrics framework, which sounds fancy, but it's really just, you can just start at like, what are the top 5 metrics that we can use to understand our business and understand if we're growing and if we're growing profitably, if we're moving in the right direction at all, right? So start kind of from the top, just defining 3 to 5 top metrics, and then start to kind of think about like, cool, like we want this metric to move, but how do we move it, right? So go one layer deeper and start thinking about what are the health metrics that kind of drives that metric, right? And then start putting some definitions, technical definitions around that, and then make sure that you actually have data so you can produce those metrics and hopefully automatically, right? So kind of start with thinking more about kind of definitions and people and targets and ambitions. I think making sure you kind of approach this from the human and the business side of things, and not just from the data side of things, if that makes sense.
Johan, I totally love it. So everybody, Johan, CEO, a co-founder at Steep, on supercharging humans who actually can make better decisions with metrics. Johan, again, super happy to have you on the show. Thanks so much.
It's been a pleasure, Allan. Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed today's conversation about metrics and data, be sure to check out Metric HQ, our online resource for the metrics that matter most to you and your business.